Yeah, good morning everyone and welcome to the session. I think we started a little late, but let's see if we can make up. I request the first presenting author, Dr. Aditya Kelkar, to present his paper on OCT angiography in type 2 MACTEL, qualitative and quantitative analysis. Dr. Aditya.
Thank you.
Would you like to start, Dr. Aditya?
Yes, madam.
Please.
I'll just share the screen in a minute. Yes. So I'll be presenting about our study on OCT angiography, type 2 macular telangiectasia, the qualitative and quantitative analysis. As you know, macular telangiectasia is a neurodegenerative disease, unknown etiology, causing bilateral, gradually progressive vision loss in the middle-aged and elderly patients. The advent of optical OCT angiography has helped us to understand macular telangiectasia disease process better due to ability to segment the different vascular plexus. Toto et al. Have described OCT angiography based on the grading system, such as temporal is stage 1, grade 1, nasal grade 2, circumferential grade 3, and the fourth grade is characterized by the neovascular tissue seen in otherwise silent retina. So what are we looking for? We are looking for quantitative and qualitative analysis of type 2 macular telangiectasia on OCT angiography, and we also want to see if the size and stage of telangiectasia affect the visual acuity in these patients. It's a cross-sectional observational study done between April and December 2019. Macular telangiectasia diagnosed on the basis of perifoveal graying, pigment clumps, right-angled venules, telangiectatic macular vessels, and the characteristic findings of foveal thinning associated with degenerative retinal cysts. All the eyes with other pathologies such as neovascular AMD or macular edema secondary to vein occlusion, diabetic retinopathy, and other pathologies were excluded. All these patients underwent extensive ophthalmic evaluation like best corrected visual acuity, fundus examination, OCT angiography, and fluorescein angiography. And these are our results. The mean age was 63.8 plus 8.81 years. Females predominantly, 80% of them were females. We have seen that those patients who had grade 3 on OCT angiography had maximum association with diabetes. Almost 94% of these patients with grade 3 had diabetes. We also realized that as this grade of OCT angiography MACTEL increases from grade 1 to grade 3, the visual acuity keeps on reducing. So 0.35 becomes 0.57 in grade 3, whereas all of a sudden in grade 4 it becomes 0.37, and this is statistically significant. Also, we have seen that stage 2 clinically is the most commonly observed post-macular telangiectasia in our group. Coming to OCT angiography parameters, the maximum horizontal diameter was 1885 plus or minus 500 microns, and the maximum vertical diameter was 2000 microns plus or minus 750 microns. The horizontal diameter of the largest cyst was observed in grade 4, that is 365, from grade 1 to grade 3. As you go, the horizontal diameter of the large cyst increases from 279 to 511. However, in grade 4, once again, the size of the cyst reduces to 365, which is similar to grade 2 of the OCT angiography characteristics. Similarly, when we come to the vertical diameter of the cyst, we see that from grade 1 to grade 3, the diameter of the cyst keeps on increasing. And then again in grade 4, the vertical diameter of the cyst has reduced to 71 microns. No cysts were observed in grade 4. This is again statistically significant, and the subfoveal location in grade 4 was only one patient, as against the juxtafoveal location of the cyst was seen in grade 4 patients in 19, that is 68% of the times. Similarly, macular telangiectasia grade 4 on OCT angiography was associated with only 35% of the patients having actual choroidal neovascular membrane. So this is in contrast to rest of the studies which have shown that macular telangiectasia grade 4 on OCT angiography is associated with 50 or 60% of the times with choroidal neovascular membrane, whereas in our study it is only seen in 35% of the patients. The eyes with progressively increasing vertical and horizontal diameter of macular telangiectasia experienced progressively worsening vision, although this positive correlation was only modest. Coming to univariate and multivariate analysis, we have seen that the vertical diameter of macular telangiectasia, as it increases by 500 microns, the visual acuity reduces. Similarly, the horizontal diameter of the cyst increases by 100 microns, the visual acuity drops. And in contrast, the central macular thickness increases by 50 microns, the visual acuity improves. So as I discussed in our results, the stage 2 was the commonest type of macular telangiectasia clinically observed, and grade 3 macular telangiectasia was most commonly observed on OCT angiography. Vertical and horizontal diameter of macular telangiectasia measured on OCT angiography and the diameter of degenerative cyst measured on OCT moderately correlate with the visual acuity, and increment in the matrix is associated with gradual decrease in the vision. The clinical staging does not agree with the structural and OCT angiography. Hence, it is prudent to image all these patients with OCT as well as OCT angiography if available. To our surprise, grade 4 macular telangiectasia on OCT angiography is associated with better vision and smaller degenerative cysts, which are most often located juxtafoveally. So we postulate that greater neurodegeneration with disintegration of the Mueller cells offers greater space for expansion of telangiectasia associated with increase in the size of telangiectasia, which leads to decrease in vision. Or maybe the telangiectasia exerts greater pressure on the surrounding structures, and this pressure causes atrophy over the years, again leading to decrease in the vision. 65% of the eyes with neovascular tissue on ORCC did not have a choroidal neovascular membrane on OCT. This shows that actually this may be a part of telangiectasia in the deeper plexus, which spreads into superficial as well as deeper structures, and it may not be the actual choroidal neovascular membrane in all cases. So there are different studies. One of the important studies by Spade et al., and he has coined a term called as retinal subsidence, which means that the deeper vessels located in the ORCC layer, and they are descending down towards the retinal pigment epithelium. So this retinal subsidence was observed in patients. Similarly, Januzzi has described similar type of picture with only few patients developing macular telangiectasia with CNBM. So the merits of the study are relatively larger sample size, and we also believe that this is the first study showing influence of vertical diameter of macular telangiectasia associated with poor vision, and the demerits are this is interpreted by only one observer and lack of longitudinal data. So to conclude, the eyes with deeper telangiectasia involving the outer retina have better vision with lesser neurodegeneration compared to type 3, suggesting this may not be a part of continuum, and a new classification based on OCT angiography is required for better understanding of this disease process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya.
Thank you.
Since a little bit over the time, we probably have to cut down on one question. I'd just like to know, why did you choose this method of classification? Because it's not easy to measure the area of telangiectatic vessels. Most people have calculated the vascularity index. Why did you choose this?
Exactly. The reason why we chose this was not many papers have shown the size of the macular telangiectasia, and once we started analyzing the data, we realized that this is one of the important factors that influences the vision.
Does anyone else have any question for Dr. Aditya?
Yeah, I was actually wondering, how did you measure the dimensions?
Yeah, there is a software that the Triton OCT has, and you can measure the dimensions of the macular telangiectasia on it.
So did you do it manually or entirely with the automated software? How much did you have to go manual?
Automated software.
Automated, fully.
How was the reproducibility of that?
This is only a single observer. We have not really, this is another limitation of our study. The second observer hasn't studied these images again.
Okay. So the machine used was Trinitron.
Triton. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya. Wonderful paper. Can you stop screen sharing?
Sure, thanks.
So Dr. Muralidhar, can you invite our next speaker?
Can you just stop sharing?
Yeah. So I think the next speaker we have is Dr. Rituraj Videkar. This paper is on retrospective analysis of persistent post-vitrectomy macular thickening and visual acuity. Dr. Videkar?
So I don't see Dr. Videkar here.
So can we go to the next person? Shall we go to the next person?
Yes, please.
Okay, can I invite Dr. Meenakshi Mahesh to present her paper, please? Dr. Meenakshi.
Yes, sir.
You can share your screen, ma'am.
Yes, sir. 1 second.
So use the green button on the bottom.
Actually, there's an issue. There's some system issue. Can I just present after this? I'll just figure it out and present it. Just 1 minute.
The backend team, have you given her sharing rights? Do you see that green button, share screen?
Yes, yes, I see it.
It's active.
So could you try right now once more?
I'm
Otherwise,
just trying that.
Or log out and log in.
otherwise we will move on to Dr. Nishita Yadav. Dr. Muralidhar, could you just, are you here, Dr. Nishita? I think I didn't see her name there.
Yes, sir, I'm here.
I think she's there.
Yeah. Then maybe-
Sir, I'm not able to start my video, but sharing screen is there.
You have to open your presentation first and then come into this one.
Okay, sir.
Dr. Meenakshi is sharing right now.
She's sharing.
Share. Fine.
Yeah. Okay. So please proceed, Dr. Meenakshi. Timer.
Can I start now, sir?
Yes, please do.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dr. Meenakshi, a DNB resident, and my topic is post-vitrectomy versus concurrent retinal and ophthalmitis. Okay. I don't think the slides are moving now. Are you able to see the slides moving, sir?
No, we are just seeing your frozen slide.
First slide. Okay, it's not moving through the Zoom platform. Okay. So I think I should.
Anand, can we stop the timer for her?
Yeah, I think the timer hasn't started.
Okay.
Should we have the next presenter and then come to Meenakshi at the end?
Yeah, I think maybe Dr. Meenakshi can come on next. Dr. Nishita, can you
Yes,
try
sir.
to screen share?
Yes, sir. Oh. Sir, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we're seeing the conclusion slide. Please start with your first slide.
Yes.
Screen up. Yeah. Yeah.
One second.
Full screen it. Yes, you can.
Shall I start?
Yes, please.
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. My presentation is on interweaving structural and functional findings in MACTEL type 2. So no financial disclosure. The objective of the study was, it was a multimodal imaging of eyes with macular telangiectasia type 2A, and its correlation with staging systems by each modality. And it was also to analyze the effect of various grades of multimodal imaging on visual function using multifocal ERG. So what is MACTEL type 2? It is a neurodegenerative disorder, mainly bilateral, that primarily affects Mueller cells The staging system have been defined clinically on OCT, FFA, autofluorescence, and on ICG. Recently, we have Octa also. So on Octa, we have known the origin from where actually it comes. So it is mainly in the deeper superior capillary plexus. So methods, it was a cross-sectional study which was conducted from May 2017 to May 2019. Patients were diagnosed using clinical findings, OCT, FFA, FAF, and Octa. Patients who were excluded were proliferative type of MACTEL, any coexisting diabetic retinopathy, other causes of CNVM, related to AMD or myopic, patients with glaucoma and other optic nerve diseases. So how we did the clinical classification, it was based on Gaius et al. That was stage 1 was foveal and the parafoveal graying, that is loss of transparency, and the stage 2 was the telangiectatic vessels, stage 3 was right angle dipping, stage 4 was intraretinal pigment, and stage 5 was neovascularization. OCT grading was done on the basis of Salo et al. Literature. That was grade 1 was break in ISOS junction confined temporal to the fovea. Grade 2, it has involved the foveal center. Grade 3, the break has involved the nasal and part also, and grade 4, any neovascularization along with the above mentioned features. So FAF grading, it was done by Wong et al. Grade 1 is loss of the normal reduced autofluorescence of the fovea. Grade 2, there is mild increase in autofluorescence, especially in the parafoveal region, and grade 3, both hypo and hyper autofluorescence were seen. So FFA, based on Toto et al., that grade 1 was temporal changes, temporal leakage, then grade 2 temporal and nasal, grade 3 full involvement, and grade 4 any of the above with neovascularization. So Octa grading was done according to Toto et al. Literature. That was grade 1, vascular anomalies in deep or the superficial plexus temporal to the fovea. In grade 2, both temporal and the nasal. Grade 3 will be the circumferential, and grade 4 will be the neovascularization. So we did the multifocal ERG in 61 hexagonal elements, and we and rings were divided, concentric rings. That was R1 to R5. R1 was less than 2 degree, R2 was 2 to 5 degree, R3 was 5 to 10 degree, R4 was 10 to 15 degree, and R5 was more than 15 degrees. So average amplitude of P1 waves were noted in all the rings, and it was compared with Ageman normative controls which we have taken. So we found that we calculated the amplitude of P1, N1, P1, N1 ratio in all the rings, and we found that it was significant in all the 4 rings except for the outer ring, that is R5. So we have made one arbitrarily classification mainly for the correlation purpose with other multimodal imaging. So we have divided this nano voltage per degree square of P1 amplitude into stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, and stage 4. And these range is mainly divided into 4 quartile ranges, and the interquartile range was same in between them. So what we found that there were 29 eyes of 16 patients of MACTEL type 2 which were included, and 25 eyes of 19 normal patients. Mean age of the patients were 57.4 years. 13 patients, both the eyes were included, and in 3 patients, only 1 eye was included because other eye has proliferative MACTEL. Mean BCVA was 0.38 plus minus 0.26. What we found in clinical finding that graying of temporal retina was seen in 100% of the patient. On clinical stage in stage 4, that is intraretinal pigment, it was more common. We also measured the EZ disruption length, horizontal length, and ELM disruption length along with CMT, and we have compared it with multifocal ERG findings. On SD-OCT and on FAF, we found that stage 3 is most common. On FFA and Octa also, we found that stage 3 is most common. This is a representative case in which we can see that temporal part, there is ISOS break. So on OCT grading, it was grade 1. And FAF, there is hyper autofluorescence. So it is stage 2 FAF. And we can see in Octa also, there are changes in temporal part of the deeper retinal plexus. On MFERG, mainly the R1 and R2 rings, those were affected in P1 amplitude. And temporal asymmetry was much more. That means the temporal parafoveal segment was more affected than the nasal one. What we found that SD-OCT it has correlated well with all the multimodal imaging except for OCTA. It has correlated positively, but not significantly. So similar finding with the FAF, it has correlated well with all the other multimodal imaging, not with OCTA. FFA, it has correlated significantly with all the multimodal imaging, including OCTA. And OCTA, it has positively correlated with all the other modality, but significantly with FFA and with multifocal ERG. Multifocal ERG, it has correlated significantly with all the other imaging modalities. So, Pada et al., they have found the multifocal ERG, it preserve N1, that means the photoreceptor is not involved, and reduced P1 amplitude, that means the bipolar cells and Mueller cells, they are involved. So it is an inner retinal dysfunction, and they found more in temporal, more than nasal, and they did not found any changes in outer rings, that is R5. But Narayanan et al., they found reduction, overall reduction from R1 to R5. In our study, we found reduction only till R4, not in R5. Toto et al.
Please wind up.
Yes, ma'am. So Toto et al. Had correlation with all the other, OCTA had correlated with all the other imaging modalities. So to the best of our knowledge, this is the first study with structural and functional correlation, and OCTA can be a non-invasive tool for the same, and high correlation of R1 P1 amplitude with existing multimodal imaging can give us more information about foveal function. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Doctor. Could you stop screen sharing? Yeah.
Yes.
So any questions, Dr. Munna, would you like to ask?
Yeah, Nish, that's a nice study. Now, supposing you had a patient in your clinic with, say, MACTEL and 6/9 or 6/12 vision, which
Yes,
of these investigations would you choose to do, and why did you look at the implicit times? You only looked at the amplitudes.
Ma'am, with 6/9 and N6 vision, the first thing I'll do will be OCT. Ma'am, I cannot hear you.
I think you're muted, Dr. Munna.
Yeah, because you have mentioned all these investigations put together. So which
Yes,
would
sir.
you choose as your first line in a patient with good vision?
First thing, ma'am, if clinically I am suspecting MACTEL, then I'll first go with OCT.
Okay. And why didn't you study the implicit times? One would have expected in early stages there should be some change in implicit time. Did you find it?
No, ma'am, we have not studied the implicit time. We have not taken.
Or anyone else has any questions?
What additional information does multifocal ERG provide when you can actually look at the things in the OCT?
So can you repeat the question?
The question was, what additional information does it provide
Yes, sir.
so that we can plan or counsel the patient? That's the question.
Sir, we can find the early changes in multifocal ERG.
So does it happen before what we pick up on the OCT or before she is symptomatic?
Sir, it could be on multifocal ERG, the findings will be much earlier.
Just curious to know how will the microperimetry do in these cases?
So microperimetry it sees the retinal sensitivity, but it takes into account the visual pathway thing also. So it is not just the, in MFERG, it is mainly the local response which we are seeing, and very localized to that center part of the fovea. So it will be more useful and it will be more informative, because in this we can see the central, then the temporal, and the all the paracentral things also we are seeing. So it will be more sensitive than the microperimetry.
Yes, I think it's a very good structure function correlate that multifocal ERG gives you, which is done accurately enough. And congratulations for trying to bring out this effect. A good
Thank
job.
you.
So
I think he has also sent it for publication, if I'm not mistaken.
good luck with that. So can we have the next speaker? Dr. Munna, can I ask you to invite the next speaker?
Next speaker is Dr. Shrey Maheshwari, who will present his paper on multimodal imaging in dengue retinopathy. My request all speakers to keep to time, because not keeping to time will affect your marks in the session.
And also, can we request backend team to prominently display the timer? I can see that thing there, but it doesn't always, it's not coming on clearly every time.
I'm not able to see the timer. Yeah.
There's one speaker slot called timer on the panel. So maybe you're not seeing that down pane. So Dr. Shrey, are you there?
Yeah. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, please proceed.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. So today I will be presenting a short study on multimodal imaging in dengue retinopathy. Are my slides moving?
Yes, they are.
So I don't have any financial disclosure, and so dengue is a vector-borne disease by a flavivirus, and it can cause a severe morbidity, especially in the tropical climates. And we see in the Southeast Asia region, the Singapore and India, that it causes the related eye disease. Approximately 9.8% Indians are affected, who are affected with dengue have eye-related symptoms. So in our study, it was a prospective study. We included 18 patients who were positive with NS1 antigen for dengue fever diagnosed by a physician elsewhere. And the examination included best corrected visual acuity at the presentation, slit lamp biomicroscopy, fundus evaluation, OCT and OCTA, and the choroidal vascularity index calculation. The mean age of the patient ranged from around 38.7 years. The mean platelet count at Nadir at the day of the maximum drop was 76,000 plus minus 25,013 per microliter, and follow-up was done at 1 week and 1 month interval. The major clinical features that we saw were the visual acuity of more than 6/18 was seen in 10 patients, between 6/18 to 6/60 in around 12 eyes, and in less than 6/60 was seen in 7 eyes. The main posterior segment findings were retinal hemorrhages, cotton wool spots, a grayish yellow foveal reflex, and vitreous cells. OCT findings included conical foveal elevation, ISOS disruption, inner retinal hyperreflectivity, and intraretinal cystoid spaces. The OCTA findings, we saw flow deficit area in superficial and deep capillary plexus, which were persistent in 10 eyes, even after the full resolution. And the choroidal evaluation showed decreased choroidal thickness and decreased choroidal vascularity index. This is the fundus picture of one of the cases which we saw. And as you can see, the cotton wool spots, retinal hemorrhages, and the macular edema. And here the OCT picture of the same patient, which shows cystoid macular edema. And as you can see in the inset, there is elevation of the conical elevation, as I mentioned earlier, known as fovealitis, and diffuse retinal thickening. This was done by the Opta, and we can see the flow void areas, both in the superficial and the deep capillary plexus. And these were the 3 measures that were taken on the follow-up at 1 week and 1 month. If you will focus on the highlighted bar, we will see that initially in the superficial plexus, the total density was 49.9. And by the time patient's visual symptoms were resolved, the final vessel density reduced to 46.5. The choroidal vascularity index was calculated by binarization on ImageJ software. It was the ratio of the total choroidal area to the blood vessel luminal area. And we found the decrease in CVI, which shows the choroidal insult. The basic treatment which was given to all the patients were topical steroids, nephafenic eye drops, and oral antioxidants. So coming to the discussion part, dengue retinopathy can be unilateral, bilateral, or asymmetric. It can occur from second day of dengue symptoms to up to 5 months. And it usually happens within 1 day of the nadir of thrombocytopenia, that is the 7th day. The main features are retinal hemorrhages, venular sheathing, yellow subretinal dots, round foveal swelling. In some cases, you can even see disc edema and vitreous hemorrhage. The classification, which is based on OCT studies, is done as diffuse retinal thickening, CME with disrupted photoreceptor layer, and fovealitis, which is a yellowish orange lesion on the fundus corresponding to the outer retinal changes, as I showed you earlier on OCT. So the pathophysiology which is suggested, it is supposedly an immune-mediated vaso-occlusive disease because it happens on 5th or 7th day, which shows a delayed onset and refutes the direct viral infection. there is a transient decrease in C4 levels, and the corticosteroid treatment is the mainstay of the treatment in most of the cases, which show it should be an immune-mediated vaso-occlusive disease. The fundus fluorescein angiography shows hyperfluorescence that persists in the late phases. We didn't do FFA in our study to keep it non-invasive, and we just stuck to the Octa. ICG shows hyperfluorescent spots showing choriocapillary and RP involvement. OCT shows focal area of outer neurosensory and RP thickening known as foveolitis. And Octa shows flow void areas and changes in vascular density. OCT angiography shows broken foveal avascular zone and loss of capillary density in superficial and deep retinal plexus, which shows it to be occlusive disease. As seen in some of the cases of CRVO also, that patient with CRVO had the reduced flow and vascular density, which is seen in the dengue retinopathy also as seen in our study. So this shows it to be a vaso-occlusive disease more. The treatment profile mainly ranges from conservative to immunosuppression. We stuck to topical steroids, but in some studies, they have even used oral steroids, and IVMP and immunoglobulins were also given. Visual recovery corresponds to the platelet recovery. And it is also very unclear whether the recovery is due to the treatment or the natural course of the disease follows the recovery on its own. But still, corticosteroid forms the mainstay of the treatment. It's better to start on topical steroids, and if patient does not respond, then you can even shift to the oral corticosteroids. And Bascalet have even described patient who improved only with immunoglobulins. So it was a pregnant lady who had the dengue, and then she was given IgG, and that helped. So the most important thing is the prognosis is depends on the foveolitis, and in some cases, due to the scarring, neovascularization can happen that can further hamper the vision. So the take-home message is that if you get a dengue patient to your ophthalm OPD, then do examine the fundus and the fundus clearly, and do warn the patient about the guarded visual prognosis, because some patients can even have scotomas post-recovery also. And frequent follow-ups are warranted as an ophthalmologist for any dengue patient visiting your OPD. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maheshwari. Can you stop screen sharing?
Yes, ma'am.
So the next person, Dr. Farhad Fatima, can start screen sharing while we ask you questions. Dr. Maheshwari, you spent a lot of time telling us about treatment, but I'd like to know the message from your paper. Which multimodal imaging technique is more prognostic of the course of the disease? Which is the one that improves most, the fastest? Which tells you things are going haywire?
I prefer that OCT and OCT angiography should be the mainstay of the imaging that we do, because the fluorescein angiography or ICG can give a better picture, but still those are invasive techniques, while OCT and OCTA, we can even judge the capillary plexus flow. And as the edema and the foveolitis, that also goes down, that can be simply judged with a normal OCT machine. So that will help with the proper evaluation of the patient with the successive follow-ups. And more than anything, the
how did you remove the projection artifacts? How did you remove the projection artifacts because of the edema?
Ma'am, the projection artifacts that we see with the OCT angio, mainly with, that can cause the difference in the flow void areas that can due to the projection artifact. So what we did is the same patient was repeatedly done, like on the same visit. Two different observers did the OCT angiography, and we did it on like within an interval of half an hour. So just to match whether our findings are similar in both the things or not, because otherwise it's an automated version. So we don't have any other way to remove the errors that we get on that.
So, I mean, it's a nice descriptive paper. You had the opportunity to actually look at your Octa, and the OCT in a more objective way. We hope that you can do it further when you go for a publication. One thing this is quantify the Octa flow deficit areas, because you seem to have a good number pinned down, and then try to correlate it to the vision. Okay, that would have made your presentation paper a little stronger.
Yes, sir.
So I think
yes, I'll do that, sir.
Yeah. So I think we can go ahead to Dr. Farhad Fatima. So Dr. Fatima, as I see, is still a non-ratified member, so this would not need to be marked. Please go ahead, Dr. Fatima.
Good morning, everyone. Am I audible, sir?
Yes, please.
Good morning. I'm Dr. Farad Fatima from MMJI Hubli. Today, I'll be presenting a free paper on prognostic factors determining outcome in idiopathic ERM surgery as on OCT, OCTA, and utilization of intraoperative OCT. I have no financial interests. The most common cause of idiopathic ERM is the advanced age. With the evolution of OCT and advancements in spectral domain OCT, ERM diagnosis and OCT-based classifications have been evolving. Microscope integrated OCT is a newer tool that is added to our vitreoretinal surgery, which helps in better surgical performance. So my study question is preoperative findings of intraoperative OCT on OCT, OCTA, and their bearing on visual acuity and anatomical outcomes post-surgery. So it was a prospective interventional case series study carried out for a period of 1 year. Inclusion criteria were all patients with idiopathic ERM with visual acuity equal to or worse than 6/12 with phobia-threatening traction, and exclusion criteria were all secondary ERMs. All the patients underwent a thorough ocular examination. SD-OCT was performed, 30-degree OCT, 3 mm scan. We looked for subfoveal fluid, intraretinal fluid, and ectopic innerfoveal layers. OCTA 30-degree scan was done. We looked for foveal avascular zone and crowding of superficial vascular plexus and deep vascular plexus. The surgical procedure was carried out on Ingenuity. It was performed by a single surgeon. Pars plana vitrectomy was done. PVD induction was done, IVT assisted. ERM and ILM peeling were done, BBG assisted, and intraoperative OCT was used to ensure complete removal and apparent reduction in the macular thickness. The patient was followed up on first, second, and third months, and at each visit, we did a complete ocular examination, OCT, and OCTA. So we had 42 eyes of 42 patients, the mean age of around 62 years, 18 were males and 24 were females. We compared the visual acuity. The visual acuity showed statistically significant improvement from preoperative to second postoperative month. Though in the third postoperative month, there was slight decline in the vision. We looked for subfoveal fluid on OCT. There was a reducing trend of subfoveal fluid over the first, second, and third follow-up, which was statistically significant. Presence of subfoveal fluid at baseline had worse visual acuity, worse baseline visual acuity. What we did was we compared the patients with a present absent subfoveal fluid and present subfoveal fluid, and we compared the logMAR visual acuity, which we saw that there was no significant difference in the visual outcome at 3 months in either of the groups. So with or without SFF or the subfoveal fluid, there was a steady increase in the visual acuity. We looked for IRF. The eyes with the intraretinal fluid, the visual acuity was worse than in eyes without IRF at the final follow-up. ERM staging was done based on Goet et al. It showed a significant decrease in the staging of the ERM, with the p-value was significant. There was downgrading of Eiffel grades over 3 months, though Eiffel persisted in majority of the cases. So if you see here at the beginning, there were stage 4 ERM about 71% of our patients, but at the end of third month, there were around 35 patients. So a significant reduction in the Eiffel, downgrading of the Eiffel. We looked on the OCTA looking for a superficial vascular plexus to look for the crowding. And what we saw this is the SVP crowding increased in the first post-op month, but remained constant in the second, and then declined in the third post-op month. So we came to think there was a slow regaining of the FAZ in the superficial vascular plexus, and there was steady betterment of the vision. When we compared this with the logMAR visual acuity, we saw that there was improvement in both, but eyes without SVP crowding had little worse vision than those with crowding at the end of 3 months. So DVP crowding was seen, and here the absence of presence of DVP crowding over periods of preoperative, postoperative, and first and second 3 months showed no statistical significance in visual change. We looked for the foveal avascular zone, so whether the foveal avascular zone was absent or present. So at the end of the 3 months, the foveal avascular zone was present in all the 3 up to the follow-up, the third follow-up, and it was statistically significant. There was increase in the number of circular FAZ and the distortion. So the patients who had a distorted FAZ on SVP had a circular FAZ at the end of third month. Similarly, a distorted FAZ at the DVP level, they had a circular FAZ at the third follow-up. We incorporated the IOCT and we saw there was apparent reduction in thickness of the macular thickness, and we ensured there was complete removal of ERM. So patient with apparent reduction of macular thickness shows significant visual improvement. So we came out, our discussion part is, my points that I want to put ahead is that if subfoveal fluid is a good prognostic factor, IRF has a poor prognosis. Presence of IFL is a poor prognosis. SVP crowding is a good prognostic factor. DVP had no significance, and at the end of 3 months, presence of FAZ and circular FAZ had good prognosis. Apparent reduction on IOCT and complete removal was good prognostic factors. So I want to conclude saying that micromorphometric studies of ERM gives valuable insights into prognostication of ERM. Noting of crowd in superficial capillaries of OCTA may have more visual gains post-operatively. And IOCT assisted complete ERM removal and intraoperative apparent reduction in macular thickness have better visual outcomes. The limitation of my study is longer study with a larger sample size should have been required. And these are my references. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Farhat. It's a pity your study is not being judged because you're the first person who kept to timing. It's a very nice study. And the only thing is, since it was prospective and not everybody has access to intraoperative OCT, it would have been good to have a control group without IOCT and to see whether there was a difference in the outcome. But otherwise, a nicely done study.
I think Dr. Sweetie is a member. It's not the non-ratified. She's not a non-ratified member.
So Sweetie is the next speaker.
Okay. Right. I'm sorry, Farhat, I meant. Yeah, I mean, excellent paper. We are always looking to see if intraoperative OCT has any, critical significance and value, and you've been able to demonstrate that. So terrific. I mean, So if there are no more questions, can we move on to the next speaker? Sorry, this is Dr. Sweetie coming up now.
Yes, you can. You can start now.
Please unmute yourself, Dr. Sweetie. Please go ahead. We can't hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Is it my slides are visible now?
Yes.
I'm audible? Yeah. At the onset, I would like to thank AIOS for giving me the opportunity. Good morning, all. Today, we are going to discuss about the retinal detachment in retinochoroidal coloboma, surgical management, that is vitrectomy with scleral buckle versus vitrectomy alone, a retrospective analysis. There is no financial disclosure. As we know, coloboma of the choroid, it is due to faulty closure of embryonic fissure occur in 0.14% of general population, and the prevalence of retinal detachment in such cases is high as 40% due to break in intercalary membrane and communication between the sub-ICM space to the subretinal space. Despite of advancement, it is still a challenging scenario because of the anatomical complexity. The aim of the study is to study the functional and anatomical outcomes and to study the complications associated with the surgical treatment. Data was analyzed through EMR of 46 eyes at Retina Department of Sri Ganpati Netralaya from 2013 to 19 in Jalna. Group 1 comprised of patient who underwent combined surgery, while Group 2 was the patient underwent vitrectomy alone. Exclusion criteria was retinal break within the normal retina, retinal detachment not involved in the coloboma, and any posterior segment pathology other than coloboma. All detailed examination was done pre and post-operatively. All patients underwent standard procedure of vitrectomy with non-contact wide-angle viewing system. CVD was induced, fluid air exchange was done. Red laser was applied around the edges of coloboma and to all suspicious area in all patients. Silicone oil was used as long-acting tamponade. Wherever required, depending on the lenticular opacity and surgeon's decision, lensectomy was done with inferior PI. In Group 1, putting 240 silicone encircling band was purely left to the surgeon's decision. In this study, in the mentioned time period, 3 surgeons were performing the surgery. Outcome studies was the primary outcome Primary outcome was the single surgery anatomical success at 1 year, which is defined as one operation which is achieved to complete reattachment of retina till 1 year post-operatively. Secondary outcome was the post-operative visual acuity and complications. Statistical analysis was done using SPSS software and p-value less than 0.05 was considered statistically significant. These are the results. Study sample comprised of 46 eyes, including both groups. Demographic characteristics, that is age, gender, lens status, baseline IOP, ONH location was noted, and it was found comparable in both the groups. Anatomical outcome, that is single surgery anatomical success at 1 year, was achieved in 17 patients in group 1 and 19 patients in group 2, while the recurrence was noted in 4 patients in group 1 and 2 patients in group 2. Data was analyzed and found to be non-significant among both the groups. This is the anatomical success as last follow-up and found to be non-significant. Functional outcome in terms of best corrected visual acuity was noted at 1 month, 1 year, and last follow-up. Data was compared among both the groups, and improvement in the visual acuity is found to be comparable among both the groups. Intraocular pressure was noted at 1 year and at last follow-up, and it is found that IOP fluctuation in both the groups is not significantly different. High IOP was noted in 23 eyes, which is the sum of patients in both the groups. They were treated medically and were started on anti-glaucoma medication. IOP rise is noted more in 8 patients. These are the other complications observed in both the groups, though statistically insignificant, but in group 1, more complications was noted, and buccal extrusion was found in 2 patients. Retinal detachment in retinochoroidal coloboma, it is rare and implicated entity. Overall anatomical success at last follow-up in our study was found to be around 87%, which is in accordance with the observation found in other studies. Omitting scleral buccal and just performing the vitrectomy does not change the rate of surgical success. There is no added benefit was noted by putting 240 encircling band, as it is a time-consuming procedure. Patient has pain, discomfort, and there are complications associated with the 240 encircling band. So from the observation, it was found that just performing the vitrectomy is sufficient. Gopal et al. Concluded that retinal detachment with lifted ICM, even if there is identifiable break in normal retina, one should meticulously look for the break within the ICM, which is as difficult as vital. Again, 240 encircling band won't be supporting the break in the ICM because of its posterior location. So it is very important to understand the pathophysiology of RD in coloboma to ensure the better outcome. From the observation, we came to the conclusion that vitrectomy, endolaser at the edge of coloboma, and silicone oil as a long-term tamponade to be considered as standard of care. From the observation and conclusion, we feel that addition of encircling band does not seem to be necessary for anatomical function. To the best of our knowledge, ours is the only study in which head-on comparison was done between the two groups, that is with without band, with reg-RD in RC coloboma. Further studies with a large sample size and long follow-up required for completing the observations found in our study. Our study is not free of limitations. These are retrospective nature, small sample size, and multi-surgeon participation. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Sweetie. Large compilation of cases on a very rare condition, good numbers on both sides. So did you at all in any of these cases have cases where you had peripheral PVR? So you have to distinguish between two cases, RD with break emanating from the coloboma and RD coloboma with the peripheral break. So did you have any cases where there was peripheral PVR and was your selection biased towards bands, I mean the surgeons?
Sir, there was peripheral PVR was noted in a very chronic cases, and it was solely dependent on the surgeon whether to put encircling band or not.
So that was my question. In those cases, did they go for a band? And in which case, those being the worst cases might have given the bias towards, against final outcome of those band vitrectomy cases?
Sir, in most of the cases, they were not using the encircling band because of this observations. So it was like they were not using the band. So if there is a grade 3 PVR, even though they were not using the band, because the most of the eyes are microphthalmic eyes. So because of that, and because of the risk of high IOP, so post-op high IOP, they were not using the band. Sir.
So in which case, my question is, was it one particular, because there were 3 surgeons, was it one particular surgeon who was preferring to use the band more often and some others not using it? Was it like that?
Yes, sir. It was like that.
All right. So it was not indication based, it was more like surgeon based. All right.
Yes, sir. So that was the limitation of my study, sir.
I understand.
Yes, sir.
Dr. Sweetie, I need to ask you a question. Rather high rate of buccal exposure.
Sir, ma'am, there are 2 patients in which buccal exclusion was.
Scientific forum probably saying it's a waste of time and things like that may not be a very scientific comment. Okay.
Okay,
you said it was surgeon's discretion. I think we give benefit of doubt to the surgeon and their experience. So saying waste of time in a scientific forum sometimes, scientific paper may not be a good idea. But otherwise, a well done study, well planned. You may want to look at your data again and find out why the surgeons tilted towards one procedure or the other.
Okay, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. I will. Yes, ma'am.
So Dr. Muralidhar, can we move ahead? Can you invite the next speaker, please?
Yes, I think, should we go back to Dr. Rituraj Videkar in case he's there? All right. I think let's go to the next one in this session. Can I invite Dr. Afreen Bari? Dr. Afreen Bari.
I thought I didn't see her name. Is Dr. Afreen here? If not, we can move on to the next speaker. I think Dr. Amina is there.
Dr. Anant Rajendran, Dr. Afreen will not be able to present.
All right, then can we move on to Dr.
You can mark her absent.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
So,
We can invite Dr. Amina Shah.
Yes, sir.
Please screen share.
Can you?
Sir, is my screen visible?
No, ma'am.
And Dr. Amina is not a ratified member, so presentation does not need to be marked.
Yes.
Please screen share, Dr. Amina.
So is my screen visible?
Yes, right now.
Good morning, all dear panelists. I'm Dr. Amina Shah, and the topic of my presentation is hydroxychloroquine-induced retinopathy, early detection using optical coherence tomography. There's no financial disclosure to make. Hydroxychloroquine is an effective drug used in the treatment of various connective tissue disorders. Retinal toxicity is the major and most serious irreversible side effect of HCQ. Risk of toxicity increases to 1% after 5 years of use or cumulative dose of 1,000 grams of HCQ. Even after cessation of the drug, progression of retinal degeneration can be seen. Therefore, ophthalmic screening is recommended to recognize earliest functional and anatomical changes. Symptoms include central vision or field defects, glare, night blindness, or deficiencies in color vision, but these are late presentations. Fundoscopic changes can be subtle or in the form of bull's eye maculopathy, but at this stage, underlying RPE cells have already degenerated. Automated perimetry is limited by a steep learning curve, patient cooperation, and physician sensitivity to early changes. Optical coherence tomography is a technique that provides cross-sectional imaging of tissue morphology in vivo. OCT is known to demonstrate abnormalities in areas of retina which appear unaffected on visual field analysis and fundoscopic examinations. And because of its shorter acquisition time, non-invasiveness, and greater objectivity, OCT has a role in detection of early hydroxychloroquine retinopathy. This was the Carl Zeiss Cirrus HD OCT that we used in our study. The aims and objectives of this study were to evaluate alterations in retinal layers in patients treated with HCQ by using OCT. All these patients were asymptomatic. To compare these findings with those of healthy, visually normal, age-matched controls. To correlate these findings with daily dose, cumulative dose, and duration of treatment. And to compare OCT findings with those of perimetry. It was a hospital-based case control study in which a total of 207 subjects, including 112 patients and 95 controls, were included. Cases included diagnosed patients of rheumatoid arthritis, systemic lupus erythematosus, and other connective tissue disorders who were put on oral hydroxychloroquine. All these patients were asymptomatic. Controls included age-matched, visually normal, healthy individuals. We included patients above 18 years of age and patients on HCQ for more than 1 year. We excluded patients having glaucoma, ocular hypertension, known optic nerve diseases or anomalies, known retinal diseases, uveitis, refractive error of more than ±6 spherical or ±3 cylindrical, liver or kidney diseases, diabetic or thyroid diseases, and patients on other retinotoxic drugs. A detailed ocular history and general physical examination was recorded. History was recorded. General physical and systemic examination was conducted in all cases. Ocular examination included best corrected visual acuity, refraction, color vision, absolute grade exam, intraocular pressure measurement, slit lamp biomicroscopy, fundus examination, OCT, and visual field analysis. The age distribution, the mean age, and the gender distribution were statistically comparable among the two groups. Having a look at the dosage parameters of HCQ, we found the total daily dose on an average was 388.23 milligrams. The duration of therapy was 3.06 years. On an average, daily dose per kg body weight was 6.4 milligrams per kg, and cumulative dose was 512.07 grams on an average. When we compared the RNFL thickness among the two groups, we found out that the average RNFL thickness along with RNFL thickness in the superior, inferior, and temporal quadrant was significantly low in patients of HCQ as compared to normal subjects. When we compared the macular thickness among the two groups, we found out that sparing the foveal center, the macular thickness in all the perifoveal as well as parafoveal quadrants was statistically significantly lower in the HCQ user group as compared to control group. When we compared the ganglion cell inner plexiform thickness among the two groups, we found out that there was a significant thinning among the HCQ users as compared to controls. When we compared the visual field among the two groups in terms of pattern standard deviation, because the visual fields were normal in both the groups, the pattern standard deviation was comparable among the two groups. Having a look at the correlation analysis between the RNFL thickness and dosage parameters of HCQ, we found out that the RNFL thickness negatively correlated with all the dosage parameters of HCQ, whereas the macular thickness did not correlate negatively with the dosage parameters of HCQ. This patient came to us with a full-blown bull's eye maculopathy. His vision was finger counting 3 meters. His visual field showed a central dense scotoma. The raster scan showed foveal atrophy, and the quantitative analysis on OCT showed significant thinning. But the aim is not this patient, to target this patient, because at this stage, nothing can be done because the changes are irreversible. This patient came to us, he was completely asymptomatic. Visual acuity was 6/6, fundus was normal, visual fields were normal. Raster scan showed qualitatively the layers of fovea were normal, but when we quantitatively analyzed the macular layers and the ganglion and the RNFL layers, we found that thinning had already begun in this patient who was still asymptomatic. Now, this is for control. This is a normal patient who had a visual acuity of 6/6. All the parameters are completely normal. The fundus, visual field, raster scan, and quantitatively also the RNFL macular thickness, everything is normal. We concluded that hydroxychloroquine can cause significant retinal toxicity even at recommended dose and duration of therapy. Optical coherence tomography can detect retinal toxicity even when patients are asymptomatic or HCQ-induced fundus changes are visible ophthalmoscopically. OCT can detect abnormalities in retina in patients on HCQ even when the visual fields are completely normal as detected by automated perimetry. This implies that structural alterations in retina in HCQ retinopathy precede functional alterations and that OCT is a sensitive screening tool for early detection of HCQ retinopathy as compared to perimetry. Thank you.
Thank you. So, as this is not a marked paper, I think we will move on because of paucity of time. Can I request Dr. Vivek Chaitanya to come up, please? Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay, can you screen share quickly? Thank you, Dr. Amina.
Yes, sir. 1 second, sir. Is my screen visible, sir?
Not yet.
Now, sir?
Not yet.
No, not yet.
Excuse me.
I think your panel is frozen.
No, sir. I'm moving the slides, sir, actually, but
It's not a thing. Meanwhile, a good paper, Dr. Amina. I mean, it's not easy to get accumulate so many, HP. So good job, and we look forward to seeing this into publication. Yeah, good job.
In fact, I was very amused that at a lower dosage, they could actually detect changes on the nerve fiber layer. I think average, they talk about more than, on a cumulative of more than 1,000 grams. They're able to detect at about 500 some odd milligrams, right?
is my screen visible, sir? Dr. Vivek here.
No, we are seeing.
Not yet.
Still,
Can the tech team help him, please?
Now, sir? Sorry.
no. I think can we move on to, yes, okay.
Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry for the interruption, sir. Good morning, everyone. Myself, Dr. Vivek Chaitanya, would like to present my experience and our experience with an innovative indigenous hands-free Shankara mobile indirect ophthalmoscope, HF-SIMO. We have no financial interest associated with this study. What lies within these innocent eyes? A mystery waiting to be unraveled. A picture which needs to be captured. How do we go about achieving these? Instruments involved in documentation of fundus findings have witnessed a seismic change over the course of time, mainly concerning two factors, which is the field of view involved and the cost associated with the procedure. So currently, smartphones have actually entered the field of documentation of fundus findings. We also have got caught onto the fever of the same. So we come a do-it-yourself approach plus a smartphone to make a combination of assembly to evaluate a fundus finding. But can we put it off in real life? Yes, we can. Our inspiration for this study was the article of head-mounted digital camera for indirect ophthalmoscopy by Aaron Wong et al. In 2014. They cited the drawbacks of expenditure and the impracticality of usage of high-end equipment in children and infants and came up with a new method of indirect ophthalmoscope camera. The making of this assembly. The materials used in this assembly involve a headband of a discarded IDEO, a flexible table lamp, a universal mobile holder, and a counterbalance made up of solid metal weights. The steps in the making, the flexible arm is attached to the mobile holder, and then the flexible arm is attached to the front part of the head mount with an aluminum plate. And as we can see in the second figure, the arm with the mobile phone can be bent as required. The counterbalance assembly is attached to the plate. Hands-free SIMO is ready for usage in the final figure. As you can see in this video, the assembly is unstable without the counterbalance, and it keeps on slipping because of its instability. But with the counterbalance in place, the weight of which is 2 times that of the table arm plus the mobile phone combined, it provides extra stability. But is this reproducible in real life situations? We tried it, we pre-validated it in RETI models, but real life situations was still a concern. So let's find out how we did it. The objectives of this study were to assess the utility and efficacy of this assembly in documenting the fundus findings in children with ROP. We used an iPhone 5s along with a 20D condensing lens for documenting the finding. We used a phone with a paraxial lighting, which the camera and the LED light were located close to each other. The sample size involved 25 eyes of 15 children with ROP. 5 eyes were excluded due to inadequate pupillary dilatation and or logistic issues. And a total of 175 snapshots, around 4 to 7 relevant images of each patient were taken from video clips, and they were taken, transferred to the laptop and evaluated in detail. These are a few set of beautiful images which we captured during our examination. As we can see the ROP findings of a ridge in all these figures. And this is a sequential set of images showing the resolution of AP-ROP in a patient who received intravitreal bevacizumab, followed by 1 week later laser photocoagulation. Coming to the analysis of the results, as you can see in this arrow mark, the red dot indicates the most negative attribute of the characteristic of the image, and the green dot represents the most positive attribute of the characteristic of the image. We used an image assessment scale given by Arapakis et al. In 2014. So coming to first characteristic, which is the pixelation, 20% of the images had insignificant pixelation, whereas 70% had no pixelation at all. Whereas coming to artifacts, around 77% of the images had insignificant or no pixelation at all. Coming to the sharpness of the images, 89% of the images had very good or excellent sharpness, and around 89% had very good or excellent contrast. We were 90% highly or completely confident in diagnosing the lesions and the final diagnosis. And when we analyzed in detail, the number of positive responses for each characteristic was statistically significant more than the negative responses. How does this instrument fare with other instruments which are similar in appearance? Smart ROP initiative, which was given by Goyal et al. In 2019, used a PVC pipe for the same. They obtained good quality images in around 89.28% of the eyes which they studied, but we obtained around 99.43% of good quality images. In comparison to the original basis of the study which we had, which was our inspiration, the distance between the examiner and the camera is more in our assembly, whereas that is not much in the indirect ophthalmoscope camera of Aaron Wong et al. So in our case, it relaxes accommodation as the distance between the examiner and the camera is more. The advantages are we can indent without external assistance, we can evaluate the anterior segment in detail, we can train residents and fellows without subsequent examination. The instrument is portable, allows for cloud storage, voice commands and notes can be given, and it's a cost-effective platform. It also provides for dynamic indentation, as we can see in this video. And also we can see other diagnoses also, such as preretinal hemorrhages and Terson syndrome with VH. Shortcomings of our study were small sample size, images were taken by an expert, and the learning curve is a little bit more, which can be overcome by practice. In conclusion, our assembly is a low-cost modality, which is easily adopted, preserving the method of IDEO examination, and the video screenshots taken are readily available for discussion with the parents and the guardians, and also for medical legal affairs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Vivek. That was a very nice and smart presentation. And what's the weight of the entire instrument? The weight of the instrument.
It's a very lightweight, ma'am, actually. The flexible table arm weighs around total of 2 kg, ma'am. And the mobile phone is around 500 to 1000 grams. So it's around 5 kg, ma'am, the total weight, because we are doubling the weight of the counterbalance together. So the overall weight around 5 to 10 kg, depending on the phone and which we are using, ma'am.
Yeah, very nice presentation. Congratulations. We look forward to seeing how it can be used in patients with smaller pupils also. Anand, would you like to ask a question?
Yes. No, it's fine. So has it made way into your routine clinical practice? Is it?
Yes, sir. Actually, whenever we are going for ROP screening, also we are trying to incorporate this into the thing because we are taking residents and fellows with us. So without subjecting the neonate or infant to additional examination, we can train the residents and fellows. We can show the findings directly in the phone via the camera, and that can be sort of used as a teaching modality also, sir.
And you are able to integrate these images into your database, ROP database.
We are creating a database, sir. We are creating a separate database. And we're trying to sort of make more observers actually analyze more images so that we can get a multiple opinions regarding the image quality, and we can get a better opinion and we can try to publish it later on.
Okay, great.
I had a small question. What is the learning curve in this?
Learning curve basically, sir, because it's the coaxial thing. So we have to sort of adjust the phone and the 20D lens like a normal IDEO only. But sometimes what happens is the phone holder doesn't hold the phone properly and the angle varies. So it takes a little bit of practice to simultaneously indent and view the same, sir. So it preserves the method of the indirect examination, but little bit extra because technicalities are involved, little minor technicalities, and little bit amount of dexterity also is needed to get the final image, sir.
What about the illumination? Do you use the phone illumination or you use the combination of the indirect and the phone?
No, sir, we are using only diffuse illumination, which is the flash which comes from the camera, sir. That is because that is located because we are choosing phones specifically like which have a coaxial or a paraxial illumination, so that the illumination is like the whole beam goes coaxially and it doesn't cause image. The quality of the image remains intact, sir.
So is it coaxial or paraxial?
In this case, it's paraxial, sir. iPhone. We have used iPhone, sir.
Okay.
Okay, I think we can move on.
Yeah.
Can I now invite Dr. Prashant Bawankule, winner of the Maharashtra Ophthalmic Society free paper session? Dr. Bawankule.
Yeah, thank you, Anand.
Yeah, could you please present your paper, Comparative Study of Various Techniques of ILM Management of RD?
Shall I? Is my screen visible now?
Yeah, it's visible.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. This is a comparative study of success of various techniques of ILM in management of RRDs with PVR more than C1 and concomitant macular hole. The incidence of associated macular hole in a case of detachment varies from 2.5 to 4%, and majority of them have significant PVR. Macular hole, we all know, happens because of pull of vitreous on the macular surface or because of the tangential traction. ILM peel techniques and further inverted ILM peel technique has increased the success rate of FTMH closure in attached retina. Does it hold true in detached retina was the question. The aim was to assess the anatomical and functional rate of vitrectomy in patients with RRD with PVR more than C1 and coexisting macular hole using different management strategies of ILM peel. This is a prospective non-randomized interventional study of 23 eyes with RRD more than PVR C1 with coexisting macular hole, which were divided into 3 groups. Group 1 underwent pars plana vitrectomy only. Group 2 had pars plana vitrectomy with ILM peel, while Group 3 underwent inverted ILM peel. Patients with recurrent RD, PVR less than C1 and myopia more than 6 diopters were excluded from the study. OCT was tried to be assessed. Few of the patients' macular hole size and other OCT predictors could not be ascertained. In 10 patients, macular hole was noted intraoperatively because of the large bullous retinal detachment and significant PVR. The technique was standard. All patients underwent 23 gauge core vitrectomy followed by PVD induction, and none of them had encircling band. Patients in group 2 and 3 underwent ILM peeling, and all the patients received silicone oil tamponade. Baseline characteristics across the 3 groups in the form of age, sex, and preoperative visual acuity matched across the group. Looking at the anatomical success of detachment, 3 patients in no peel group had recurrent retinal detachment. Only 1 patient out of 10 in simple peel group had recurrent retinal detachment, while with inverted flap group, none of them had detachment. If you look at the KM plot, it showed a significant p-value of 0.029. which meant that the recurrence rate with ILM-PIL group was late, and importantly, if the recurrence happened, it happened at a later period of post-operative period. 2 patients had recurrence because of PVR, peripheral PVR. 2 patients had macular hole opening. One had only macular hole opening without significant PVR and peripheral break, while one had associated peripheral break. These are the post-operative fundus photographs and OCT at 1 month of no ILM-PIL and ILM-PIL group. And this is a fundus photograph and OCT on day 1, where you can see the stuffed ILM-PIL into the macular hole, and at 1 month, near normal architecture of the macular contour. Visual gain was significantly better, not significant, was definitely better, significantly better in ILM-PIL groups, though it did not achieve statistical significance. So to conclude, better macular hole closure and retinal reattachment rates were achieved in inverted ILM-PIL groups in cases of RRD with concomitant macular hole with PVR more than C1. Visual gain is seen more in ILM-PIL groups compared to no-PIL groups. Though challenging and not free of complications, inverted ILM-PIL can be considered as a procedure of choice in these cases. The limitation of our study is that it is a small sample size, a small sample group, and it would need large randomized studies to confirm the results. And meanwhile, this paper got published in Egyptian journal. Thank you.
So thank you, Dr. Prashant. A very nice paper, very relevant paper. Did you correlate your results to the size of the macular hole or any other macular?
Yeah, exactly. As I said, OCT, we attempted pre-op OCT. Out of 23, only 13 we could achieve OCTs, but we could not ascertain the size or other OCT predictors because of the fluid and all that thing. So it was not really possible. That's what I mentioned initially.
Any other questions from?
I think it was a very nice presentation, Prashant.
Thank you.
What I was actually wondering was, how did you choose intraoperatively between ILM tucking and ILM complete removal?
No.
So size would have been a problem there, right?
No, it was randomly ascertained for this particular cases. We are going to do this. With the randomly it was decided previously only, not intraoperatively.
So irrespective of whatever size you will
randomization, rather I should say.
Very nice presentation, Prashant.
Thank you,
You
madam.
showed one OCT of quite a large hole with that little bit in the center. Even that went in for randomization.
Yeah, every case went under randomization, madam. It was not intraoperatively decided which will go for which particular case. In fact, that large macular hole which I showed as a pre-op OCT, in fact, when you see it later during the intraoperative, once the fluid comes down, the hole size was not as that big. And that's why the pre-op size of the hole or OCT predictors do not really help us in deciding which particular case should go for this.
Very nice.
Thank you, madam.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me now go on to the last speaker, Dr. Meenakshi. Are you here?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Yeah.
Are my slides visible now, sir?
Yes.
Yes, now.
I'm very sorry for the glitch in the morning. Good morning. I am Meenakshi, a DMD resident, and my topic is post-vitrectomy versus concurrent retinal detachment in endophthalmitis. We have no financial disclosures. So endophthalmitis is a condition which often is associated with poor outcomes, and these are the signs and symptoms as we know, which is usually pain, diminished vision, congestion, vitritis, and anterior segment inflammation, etc. In the same thing, endophthalmitis with RD though has very poor outcomes as in studies. So usually there are two types of RDs which can occur with endophthalmitis. That's usually the delayed onsets or the concurrent retinal detachments. The delayed onsets are the ones which happen after initial management of endophthalmitis with the intravitreal procedure such as an antibiotic or a vitrectomy. and concurrent is when the patient presents with both endophthalmitis and RD at presentation itself. So the causes of retinal detachment can be varied. In group 1, it could be breaks that were not visualized previously because of the media haze. It could be because of iatrogenic breaks that we caused during the intravitreal procedures. And in group 2, it could be a causative factor such as an eventful anterior segment surgery, trauma, or a virulent organism which could cause necrosis of the retina and further retinal detachment. So how common are these? Both concurrent and post-vitrectomy RDs are not very common as shown in these studies. The Nelson group gave an overall rate of 16%, whereas a post-vitrectomy of 21%, whereas the Dave group from India said about 21.5% of concurrent retinal detachments and 79% of delayed onset RDs. So what is not known from the previous studies is the demographic aspects of the subjects, the microbiological profile of the endophthalmitis in each group, and the anatomical and functional outcomes in both groups. So our aim was to determine and compare the demographics, the details of initial treatment, the retinal status, functional and anatomical outcomes at the final follow-up in these two subjects of these groups. So it was a retrospective study design of 121 patients with 76 in group 1 and 45 in group 2 from Jan 2005 to December 2017. They were grouped into group 1 was delayed onset and group 2 concurrent RD. So these were the conditions that we took into criteria that we took into consideration. Age, gender, the etiology of the endophthalmitis. The visual acuity was scored according to ICD grading, lens status, intraocular foreign body. And in the RD per se, we looked into the characteristics, any PVR changes, initial treatment, and outcomes. So the treatment option was left to the surgeon's discretion, depending on the severity of the condition, and the data was analyzed using SPSS. These were the studies that these were the tests that we performed, and a p-value less than 0.05 was considered to be significant. Our results showed a significant age difference between the two groups, whereas the older age group belonged to group 2. The gender prevalence, there was a male preponderance in both groups, and the lens status in group 1 was mostly phakics and group 2 was pseudophakics. Coming to the etiology, group 1 had an almost equal ratio of post-traumatic and post-surgical, whereas group 2 had a higher number of post-surgery, which included cataract, penetrating keratoplasty, and trabeculectomy. The vitrectomy plus intravitreal antibiotics was the mainstay treatment which is given in most patients of group 1, whereas this plus silicone oil injection was given in group 2, and the mean time to develop RD in group 2 was approximately 6 days. This brings us to the first take-home message of our study. We show that the vitreous tab and aqueous tab together gave us a higher microbiological yield to aid in the diagnosis in both group 1 and group 2. Coming to the type of organism that was grown in group 1 and 2, the gram-positive organisms were more common in group 1, whereas gram-negative were more common in group 2. This made us probably think that the virulence was higher and hence causing a concurrent RD at presentation itself. The most common type of retinal detachment we found in both groups are egmatogenous retinal detachment. And the type of break, contrary to our belief of a horseshoe tear or a dialysis, was a retinal hole. So this could also give us the importance of a need for a thorough evaluation pre-op in anterior segment surgeries. The anatomical outcomes, we found about 60% attachment of the retina rates in both group 1 and group 2, and a globe status of about 77%, which was normal at the final follow-up. And a functional outcome, about 35% in both group 1 and group 2 had an improved visual acuity. We can see the change in the near total blindness group in both groups. The take-home message 4 is the most important of our study, where a prompt management of RD, even in the setting of endophthalmitis, can give a reasonably good anatomical and functional outcome. So our study was comparable in both the etiological factors compared to the study by Dave et al., which concluded that post-trauma overall in groups was the most common cause of this condition. The exogenous causes were more common in other studies as well. And anatomical outcomes were similar, if not better, compared to the other groups. About 60% reattachment was seen in both groups in our study. And a functional outcome of about 35%, as I showed previously, was achieved in both groups in our study, which was comparable and better compared to other studies. So I thank you for this opportunity.
Yeah. Very nice, very elaborate presentation. I'd like to congratulate you on looking at this. I think it's important to, this is an emergent condition. It needs to be addressed, and this is something which has happened in real life. So you found the outcomes are more or less similar. So it's a very good study and very well presented too.
Thank you.
Any other questions, Dr. Muralidhar? It's unfortunate that this is not a presentation that we can mark. Because
Paper. Yeah, it was a very nice paper, and I must congratulate you, Meenakshi, for this very crisp presentation. It was very nice.
Thank you, sir.
I think Anand, can we move on? Do we have somebody, or shall we close?
So I think we do not have Dr. Rituraj Videkar here. Am I right? The team, CSC team. I don't think he's here.
No, he's not there.
We have one more absentee, no?
And we don't have Dr.
Yes, Dr. Anand, Dr. Rituraj is not there, and already we are delayed. Can you just send the marks of this session, and we will proceed for the next one.
Correct. Also, we would like to place on record that the keynote address.
Address is also absent.
Also not available.
Yes.
So fine. I'll just like to thank all the presenters for very good presentations, our panelists, and last word from Dr. Muna Bende.
Congratulations to everyone who presented. Very nice studies. And, I think we all learned a lot. So with apologies to the next session, we just close this.
Yeah, and just to place on record, we started late. We finished exactly in 1.5 hours. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we made up.
We maintained the delay.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.